has a slightly different arrangement, maybe has a slightly different activity or action. But now we can also synthesize a lot of antibiotics, fully synthesize a lot of antibiotics. So we're not necessarily growing them in vats, although that is still going on in some cases. So what are some features to consider when we talk about antibiotics or antimicrobials? Well, the first thing we have to recognize is that anytime we're using a chemical, it has the chance to kill the microbe we're interested in, but also might kill other things, other microbes, part of our own flora, our own cells. So one of the biggest things that we're concerned about is selective toxicity. We want to choose compounds and antimicrobials, antibiotics that are selective to bacteria but don't target our own cells. If they target our own cells, that can be a problem. So with this, we develop what is called a therapeutic index that allows us to determine the selective toxicity of a compound or a chemical or an antibiotic that we might be using. Chemicals that have a high therapeutic index then are going to be less toxic to the patient. So those chemicals that target something that's uniquely bacterial. So penicillin, for instance, targets peptidoglycan. Because we don't have peptidoglycan, penicillin is not a concern for us. It's not going to destroy any of our cells, and so it has a high therapeutic index. That doesn't take into account allergies. You could still be allergic to penicillin, but that's a totally different issue. That's a hypersensitivity. It's not that the penicillin is killing your cells. It's not targeting your cells. It's targeting cells that have peptidoglycan. You can also have then, of course, a low therapeutic index. In this case now, the compound you're using, the chemical you're using, can target your own cells, can destroy your own cells. When that's the case, you're generally going to be monitoring the levels of chemical in the bloodstream. If they get too high, of course, you cut down on the medication. A couple of other features we want to take into account. Antimicrobials, they either kill or inhibit the growth of the microbes. If they kill, we call them a bactericidal. If they just inhibit, then they're a bacteriostatic. One kills the microbes, one just inhibits its growth. Other features that we need to be aware of, the spectrum of the antimicrobial. What does it target? We can refer to an antimicrobial that would have a broad spectrum, one that targets lots of microbes. So an antibiotic that targets peptidoglycan, it's going to have a broad spectrum. It's going to go after lots of bacteria because most bacteria have peptidoglycan. Problem with these broad spectrum antibiotics is that they can also target your own flora. A lot of times the reason you develop diarrhea after being put on an antibiotic regimen is because if it's a broad spectrum, it's killing your own normal flora too. That makes up half of the wet weight and dry weight, I imagine, of your feces. So it takes quite a bit of your microbes. The other thing we can say about a broad spectrum antibiotic, though, is that we can use it right away. So if you come into the hospital sick and we're not sure what's causing the illness just yet, we can give you a broad spectrum antibiotic and hopefully target the microbe that is making you sick. Of course, now we can also have narrow spectrum antibiotics. These are going to be antibiotics that target a specific microbe. So we have to ID the pathogen first. You come into the hospital sick, we're going to take a culture, we're going to run some tests and hopefully be able to identify if it's Streptococcus or E. coli or whatever might be making you sick. And then we can give you an antibiotic that targets that microbe specifically. The problem with these narrow spectrum antibiotics is they take some time. We can't treat you right away. You come into the hospital sick, first thing you're going to be given is a broad spectrum. Then they'll run the test, hopefully identify what's causing the infection, and follow that with a narrow spectrum antibiotic. A couple of other things that we want to keep in mind. The distribution of the chemical. How is it going to be distributed through the body? You have to concern yourself with barriers that need to be crossed. Some chemicals aren't going to be able to cross certain barriers. Does it need to be injected? Can it be taken orally? What's its half-life? How long is the chemical going to stay in the system? How quickly is the body going to remove it? Individuals with liver damage, the chemical will probably have a longer half-life because the liver is not working as well to remove the antibiotic. So you have to take those into consideration when administering it. Of course, we have to be concerned with adverse effects. As I mentioned earlier, allergic reaction, penicillin, I shouldn't say a lot, but some individuals are allergic to penicillin, other compounds. And here's the thing, you might not know you're allergic to it until you've been given it and you have a reaction to it. So a lot of times you might not know. So there's allergies. They can also have a toxic effect. So this would be a case with using an antimicrobial that has a low therapeutic index. You run the risk of toxicity there because that antibiotic is targeting other cells, other of your own cells. And then, as we've already mentioned, suppression of your own normal flora. And Clostridium difficile is one of those microbes that can take advantage of this suppression. It's an intestinal microbe that, if you are on antibiotics, sometimes can cause infection. So let's consider the mechanisms of these antimicrobials. What is their action? How do they work? And you know, when we had this last exam, one of the questions dealt with the mechanisms of pathogenicity. And I sometimes wonder if the problem with answering the question is not quite understanding what the question is asking for. Anytime you see the term mechanism, we're really asking, how do they do it? What is the process by which these antimicrobials work. So in this case, we're talking about the mechanisms of action. You know, how is it that they cause the disruption in the cells that they do? And there's a number of ways that they can go about doing this. Let's start by considering the cell wall. So if you can develop a antimicrobial or discover one that a microbe is producing that targets the cell wall, then you're going to have an antimicrobial that's going to have a high therapeutic index, especially if it targets peptidoglycan, which is what penicillin does. Penicillin targets peptidoglycan. If we imagine, we take a look at our cell here, and then we've got our peptidoglycan layer that's being built above that here. And imagine this can be layers if we're talking about a gram-positive microbe. Peptidoglycan, or excuse me, penicillin interferes with the formation of this peptidoglycan layer. It is what we call a beta-lactam drug. These drugs, there's several of them. We're only going to mention 3, and your book goes into a whole list of different penicillin drugs. Don't worry about those, okay? We only want to know about just penicillin in general, and then the other 2 that I'm going to talk about. We won't worry about the other drugs your book lists. But these beta-lactam drugs, they inhibit the enzymes that are involved in the cell wall synthesis. And so penicillin interferes with these side chains here that are forming. Vancomycin another one of these beta-lactam drugs that interferes with peptidoglycan. It prevents the formation of the cross bridges, so you don't get the building of the wall. And then finally, bacitracin is a compound that works on the inside. So instead of allowing the molecules that are needed for building the peptidoglycan from being passed over so that they can be used, bacitracin prevents that from occurring. So we're interfering with the formation of the cell wall. That prevents the bacteria from growing, and so you can stop the spread of the infection. Notice that they're not killing the bacteria, and this is only going to be effective in cells that are actively dividing. Because if you're not actively dividing, you're not building your peptidoglycan wall, and so you're not going to be interfered with by these drugs. So it really just stops the spread of the microbe. It doesn't kill those that are already there. That's where your immune system has to come in and play its role. There are some microbes that produce beta-lactamase. It's an enzyme that interferes with these kinds of drugs. And so those microbes have a resistance to penicillin, resistance to vancomycin. Other places that you can interfere with or affect the microbe's growth, in addition to interfering with the cell wall, we can interfere with protein synthesis. So in the cell here, you know, you have your two-part ribosome. If you can interfere with either part, so develop a drug that prevents those from coming together, when protein synthesis occurs, you know that the messenger RNA comes through here, and then transfer RNA brings amino acids to this site so synthesis can occur. If you can interfere with transfer RNA, if you can interfere with the messenger RNA binding to the ribosome, so many places here, if you can interfere with the protein synthesis pathway in any way, you might be able to affect the microbe's ability to grow, affect its ability to produce the proteins it needs for metabolism, and then so you can limit or inhibit the microbe's growth. Now, this may be effective in killing the microbe, depending on the pathway that you're interfering with. If it's an essential protein for metabolism or something, that might lead to the death of the microbe. Or if it's something necessary for building a structural component, then maybe it just prevents the spread of the microbe, but doesn't necessarily kill it. Nucleic acid synthesis. So now we're talking about the circular DNA that we have inside the cell. If you can interfere with the formation of this molecule, it supercoils. So we have a drug that can interfere with that supercoiling, prevent the